So I find this so interesting. There's an AI that's going around on TikTok. You've probably seen it. And it's showing Tutankhamun from childhood to adulthood. First, he died when he was like 18, 19 years old. He never reached full adulthood. So the controversy is that Tutankhamun in that video is shown as a fair skinned, light skinned person, when it's kind of accepted that Egyptians didn't look like that by some people in like modern history. They think that Egyptians look like modern Middle Eastern people. So it's causing all this controversy. But there's also a group of people that think Tutankhamun was black. Okay? So I find this so interesting because personally, I believe that we will never know what Tutankhamun looked like. You can believe that he was fair skinned, you can believe that he was dark skinned, whatever. But I just want to show a couple of actual Egyptian artifacts that belonged to Tutankhamun. I want to talk about like the racial makeup of the people who used to live in his time. So first, these are the actual slippers that were buried with Tutankhamun. And if you look closely, there's two figures on each foot, and they're Nubians, dark-skinned Africans. That's what they used to be called. And like they clearly have African features and super dark skin, and they're not oxidized or like, turn darker because of the time or anything like that. These are 3,000 years old. The colors are bright. They're brown and gold and black and whatever. So that's what they look like, a racial group. And then if you look at some of the other images of like statues and paintings and stuff, it shows Tutankhamun having dark skin here. So like these were buried with Tutankhamun as well, next to his golden mask, statues that have dark colored skin, and so on in Egypt. Now, I'm not saying that Tutankhamun had the same color skin as this, but you have to remember where Egypt is. It's in Africa. And I learned when I was younger that Egypt wasn't a place, ancient Egypt wasn't a place where there was just one race living there. It wasn't like Europe, it wasn't like North America or anything like that. There were many, many wars in that area, lots of, migration in that area as well. And there were basically four races of people that mixed together year after year after year. So this is like an example of a diagram that was found in the tomb of King Seti. I think like Seti the First or something like that. I think that's what it says somewhere here. This is not the exact one, but it's just an example. And it showed that there were four main races of people that lived in Egypt: Egyptians, Libyans, Asiatic looking people, and Nubians. And it's true. For example, Cleopatra would have looked like the lady at the end, like the man at the end, really. But because she was Greek, right? She would have looked like him. So people think that Tutankhamun either looked like him or he looked like him, the Nubian. Okay? So let's just go over what Tutankhamun looked like physically. We know from looking at his mummy that he was only 5'6", and he walked with a limp because he had a broken bone in his left foot. He had Kohler's disease and he had malaria. So he was super skinny. He walked with a limp. He had buck teeth and an overbite as well. And we can see this from his physical appearance. So Tutankhamun's parents were also siblings, which is kind of gross. But his grandfather was this guy, the pharaoh Amenhotep. Look at Amenhotep. Look at him. Look at the statues of this guy. His grandfather. And remember, his parents were siblings, so they probably looked like him too. So, from statues that are inside of the tomb and on the walls of the tomb, we don't really know that Tutankhamun was black or brown or whatever. But we do know through DNA that the pharaohs were a mix of Middle Eastern looking people from the Levant area and sub-Saharan African. But we just don't actually know what they looked like because it was such a long time ago. We just have these paintings. We don't know what archaeologists way back then did to those paintings or whatever, if they're original or if they've been altered in some way. So I guess it's causing so much controversy, I think, because for the last like 300, 400 years, people have been anti-black. And they're really upset to think that, hey, these people who were so mystical and entertaining and like we want to know so much about them, some people just don't like black people. And so when they think that Egyptians could be black or a mix of black, they get upset. And so I think that's what the biggest issue is, that ancient Egyptians were a mix of a bunch of different races that we don't actually definitively know what they look like. And so when people say, oh, there's a new movie about Cleopatra coming out, we didn't really know what Cleopatra would have looked like. We know that she has a genetic background of a Greek, but what did Greeks look like back then? They don't look like what the Greeks of today look like. You know what I mean? So yeah, and then you have to actually remember what happened to the pharaohs. The pharaohs, Tutankhamun's family, the parents married their brother or sister, and their father's parents married his sister or something like that. So there's a lot of inbreeding in that. So I think the definitive answer is we don't really know what they look like. We think we know that they had darker colored skin because they were in that racial group that exists in the Middle East and in Africa, and Egypt is in Africa. But like I said, there were so many wars and there was so much migration in that area that there were a bunch of different races living together. So I don't think that the Egyptians were black. They could have been black, but they could have also looked like Iranian people. They could have looked like Greek people, just because all those people lived in Egypt at the time.